My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for 26 years of my life, I believed I was the unwanted daughter in a family that only had room for one golden child. My brother Daniel was 2 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, the difference in how we were treated was impossible to ignore. We grew up in Westfield, an affluent suburb outside Chicago, where my father Robert ran a successful construction company called Mitchell and Associates. Our house was the kind that belonged in magazines, sprawling colonial with perfectly manicured lawns and a three-car garage. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Inside, there was a clear hierarchy, and I was firmly at the bottom. Daniel was everything my father wanted in an heir: athletic, charming, and loud enough to command attention in any room. I was quiet, bookish, and according to my father, too much like your mother for your own good. He said it like being like my mother was a character flaw. Everything changed when I was 9 years old. My mother, Catherine, was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. The disease moved quickly, and within 8 months she was gone. I still remember the last thing she said to me, holding my hand in her hospital bed. "You're stronger than you know, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." After Mom died, the favoritism became impossible to ignore. Daniel got enrolled in St. Augustine Prep, the most prestigious private school in the area, while I was sent to the local public school. For his 14th birthday, Dad bought him a new laptop and threw a party at the country club. When my birthday came 2 months later, I got a gift card to Target and a hasty, "Happy birthday" over breakfast. "Boys need different opportunities," Dad would say whenever I questioned the disparity. "Daniel has to learn business, make connections. You'll get married someday, and none of this will matter." By high school, I had stopped asking for equal treatment. Instead, I threw myself into academics, determined to prove my worth through excellence. While Daniel got private tutors to maintain his mediocre grades, I studied alone in my room, often until 2 a.m. When he made varsity football with all the expensive gear Dad bought him, I ran track in secondhand sneakers from Goodwill. The most painful moment came during my junior year. I had won a state-level science competition and qualified for nationals. When I told Dad about it at dinner, he barely looked up from his phone. "That's nice, Sarah. Hand me that salt." 3 weeks later, Daniel scored the winning touchdown in a regional game, and Dad organized a celebration dinner at the finest restaurant in town, inviting all his business associates to toast his champion son. That night, I stood in my bathroom mirror and made a promise to myself. I would succeed not because of my family, but in spite of them. Someday, they would regret underestimating Sarah Mitchell. College became my escape route. While Daniel coasted into Northwestern on my father's alumni connections and donations despite his 2.8 GPA, I applied to schools knowing I'd have to fund my education myself. When my acceptance letter from University of Illinois Chicago arrived with a partial academic scholarship, Dad's only comment was, "Well, at least it's affordable." My college years were a blur of exhaustion and determination. While Daniel posted Instagram photos from fraternity parties and ski trips, I worked 2 jobs to keep myself afloat. My partial scholarship covered tuition, but everything else, housing, books, food, transportation, came out of my pocket. I worked mornings at the campus library, then waited tables at Tony's Italian restaurant from 5 p.m. until closing. Between classes and work, I averaged about 4 hours of sleep a night. During my first semester, I fell asleep during lectures 3 times and nearly failed calculus. Professor Martinez, my economics teacher, called me to his office after I dozed off during a review session. "Miss Mitchell, I notice you're struggling to stay awake, but your assignment work shows real potential. Is everything okay?" That simple question of genuine concern broke something inside me. I explained my situation: the 2 jobs, the lack of family support, my determination to graduate debt-free. Instead of the disciplinary action I expected, Professor Martinez connected me with a better-paying research assistant position and arranged for me to have access to the faculty lounge for naps between classes. That small act of kindness changed everything. With better pay and more manageable hours, I could finally focus on my studies. I discovered a natural talent for business and finance, particularly in analyzing complex financial structures and finding discrepancies. Meanwhile, Daniel's college experience followed a predictable path. He partied his way through Northwestern, barely attending classes and graduating with a C average. During holiday breaks, he'd brag about the job waiting for him at Dad's company, regardless of his grades. "College is really about networking," he'd say. "All the studying you do is just sad, Sarah." In his senior year, Daniel crashed his BMW while driving drunk from a party. Instead of letting him face consequences, Dad quietly withdrew him from Northwestern and immediately gave him a position as junior vice president at Mitchell and Associates. No degree required when nepotism was involved. I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in business administration and finance. My graduation fell on the same day as Dad's annual company golf tournament. He sent his regrets via text and a $100 gift card to Amazon. My first job after college was at Harper Financial Services, a mid-sized accounting firm in downtown Chicago. The starting salary was modest, but it was enough for me to rent a small studio apartment in Lincoln Park. For the first time in my life, I had my own space and the freedom to make my own choices. Daniel, meanwhile, was handed a corner office, company car, and six-figure salary for a job he was completely unqualified for. At the few family dinners I still attended, he would hold court about his business deals and construction projects, taking credit for Dad's work while I sat quietly, never mentioning my own growing success. "Sarah's still doing that number-crunching thing," he'd say dismissively if anyone asked about me. Nothing exciting like real estate development. Over the next 5 years, our paths diverged dramatically. I poured everything into building my career, advancing from junior analyst to senior financial consultant. My expertise in forensic accounting caught the attention of larger firms, and I was eventually recruited by Sterling and Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious financial investigation companies. My salary tripled. All the while, Daniel was spiraling. What started as work hard, play hard quickly became mostly play hard. He would show up to the office around noon, leave by 3 p.m., and spend his evenings at expensive bars and casinos. His expense reports showed thousands spent on client entertainment that always seemed to happen at the same gentlemen's clubs. Dad seemed willfully blind to Daniel's behavior. When Daniel totaled his second company car, Dad bought him a more expensive one. When complaints came in about Daniel's inappropriate behavior toward female employees, Dad had HR bury the reports. When Daniel's gambling debts mounted, Dad paid them off without question. It was at a charity fundraiser for the Children's Hospital that I met Michael Chen, a pediatric surgeon with kind eyes and a genuine interest in my work. Unlike most men I dated, he never seemed threatened by my ambition or independence. "Forensic accounting sounds fascinating," he said, actually meaning it. "You're basically a financial detective." "Something like that," I laughed. "I follow the money to find the truth. People can lie, but numbers usually don't." Around this time, I was offered a partnership track at Sterling and Associates, an almost unprecedented advancement for someone my age. When I called to share the news with Dad, his secretary put me on hold for 20 minutes before telling me he was in an important meeting. I never called back. Instead, I celebrated with Michael and the close friends who had become my chosen family. 2 weeks later, I received a formal invitation to Sunday dinner at Dad's house. These dinners happen maybe twice a year, and I usually found excuses to avoid them. But something told me I should attend this one. The evening was tense from the start. Dad looked older, his complexion gray, and his breathing labored. Daniel was clearly hungover, fidgeting and checking his phone constantly. When the housekeeper served dessert, Dad cleared his throat. "I've asked you both here because I have an announcement. My doctor has advised me to step back from daily operations due to some heart issues." My stomach dropped. Despite everything, he was still my father. "Are you okay?" He waved off my concern. "Just getting older. But it's time to think about the future of Mitchell and Associates. Daniel will be taking over as CEO effective next month." Daniel's face lit up with triumph. "I won't let you down, Dad." I sat in stunned silence. The company my father had built was being handed to someone who could barely manage his own checking account. "Sarah, Dad said, finally acknowledging me. I know you've done well in your accounting work. Perhaps Daniel could use your services for the annual audit. It was meant as a consolation prize. Congratulations, Daniel, I managed to say. Big responsibility. The biggest, Dad agreed. But he's a Mitchell. This company is his birthright. As if I didn't carry the same blood. As if I hadn't proven myself 1,000 times over. That night, I cried for the first time in years. Not from sadness, but from pure rage. I was done seeking approval from people who would never see my worth. What I didn't know was that fate was about to deal a hand that would change everything. 3 months later, Dad had a massive heart attack. Michael was on duty in the ER when the ambulance brought him in. It's serious, Sarah, Michael said gently. You should come. I arrived to find Daniel already pacing outside the ICU, looking terrible, unshaven, bloodshot eyes, expensive clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. They won't tell me anything, he snapped when he saw me. You're dating a doctor. Make yourself useful and find out what's going on. I ignored the jab and spoke to the charge nurse, who told me Dad was stable but critical. Only one visitor at a time was allowed. You go, I told Daniel. I'll wait. While Daniel was inside, I stepped away to call Michael for more information. As I was returning, I passed Dad's room and froze when I heard my name. Sarah can't know about the new arrangements. Dad's voice was weak but urgent. She'll try to contest everything. Don't worry, Daniel replied. We've made sure she's completely cut out. The lawyer said the new documents are ironclad. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding. What arrangements? What documents? Over the next week, as Dad remained hospitalized, I began a careful investigation. I started by accessing public records about Mitchell and Associates and Dad's personal holdings. Nothing seemed immediately wrong, but there were gaps. Subsidiaries with vague purposes, properties transferred between entities, large consulting payments to unclear recipients. I called in a favor from a colleague who specialized in construction industry finance. She helped me identify several red flags. These patterns are consistent with someone moving money around to hide it, she told me. If this were my case, I'd be looking for embezzlement or tax evasion. With this information, I took a calculated risk. I reached out to Jessica Park, a junior accountant at Mitchell and Associates who had worked with me briefly at Harper Financial. Sarah, great to hear from you, she said when we met for coffee. Are you finally joining the family business? I kept my tone casual. Actually, I'm concerned about Dad after his heart attack. I'm trying to understand the company's financial health so he has one less worry during recovery. Jessica hesitated, then lowered her voice. I probably shouldn't say this, but it's been chaos since your brother took over. The books are a mess, and no one can question anything without risking their job. Over the next hour, Jessica painted a disturbing picture. Projects running over budget, investors growing concerned, and most troubling, large sums disappearing with minimal documentation. There's this account that only Daniel and your father access, Jessica explained. Millions have gone through it, but it's just labeled Executive Discretionary Fund. When I asked about it during the audit, I was told to ignore it. That night, I began compiling everything into a secure file. If my suspicions were correct, Daniel wasn't just incompetent, he was actively stealing from the company. But the real bombshell came 3 days later. While reviewing old insurance documents, I found a reference to a Catherine Mitchell family trust established the year before my mother died. I'd never heard of this before. With growing unease, I dug deeper. Through records requests and careful research, I uncovered the devastating truth. My mother had left a substantial inheritance specifically for me. Money from her family, separate from the Mitchell fortune. There had been college funds, investment accounts, and even her jewelry collection, all designated for me in a trust that should have activated when I turned 18. I never saw a penny of it. Further investigation revealed that after Mom's death, Dad had somehow gained control of these assets as trustee. Over the years, he had systematically liquidated my inheritance, using it first to cover Daniel's expensive education, then his failed ventures and gambling debts. The final insult, discovering that Mom's sapphire ring, the one she wore every day and promised would be mine, had been given to Daniel's girlfriend last Christmas. She pawned it 6 weeks later after they broke up. Everything I had struggled for, my education, my apartment, my financial independence, should have been provided by the trust Mom left for me. While I worked double shifts and ate ramen noodles, Dad and Daniel were spending my birthright. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by documents, tears streaming down my face as years of confusion finally made sense. This wasn't just favoritism. This was theft. This was betrayal on a level I couldn't have imagined. Armed with evidence and burning with righteous anger, I went to confront Dad at the hospital. I chose a time when Daniel wouldn't be there. He had a standing poker game on Wednesday nights. Dad was propped up in bed, looking friendlier than I'd ever seen him, but his eyes were as sharp and calculating as ever. "Sarah, this is unexpected," he said, no warmth in his voice. I placed my folder of documents on his bedside table. "We need to talk about Mom's trust." His expression didn't change, but a slight tightening around his mouth told me everything. "What about it?" "I know everything, Dad. The college fund she set up for me, the investments, her jewelry. I know you took it all." He sighed, not with guilt but with irritation. "You were always too clever for your own good." "It was mine," I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay composed. "Mom wanted me to have it. Daniel needed that money to establish himself properly," Dad said coldly. "You were always going to be fine on your own." The cruel irony hit me like a slap. My self-sufficiency, born of necessity because of his neglect, was now being used as justification for that very neglect. "There's more," I said, pulling out the evidence of embezzlement. "Daniel's been stealing from the company for years." Dad didn't even look at the papers. "I'm aware of Daniel's financial arrangements." "You know, and you're letting it happen?" "It's my company. I decide how it's used." The door opened then and Daniel walked in, still in his poker clothes. He saw me and his face darkened. "What's she doing here bothering you, Dad?" "She found out about Catherine's trust," Dad said flatly. Daniel's demeanor changed instantly. He stepped toward me, suddenly menacing. "You've always been jealous of what I had. Now you're trying to use Dad's illness to grab what isn't yours." "What wasn't mine?" I echoed. "Mom left that money specifically for me." "Listen carefully, Sarah," Daniel said, his voice low and threatening. "Drop this now. If you push this, I'll make sure you regret it." Dad pressed the call button. "I think this visit is over. I'm having my lawyer update my will tomorrow to make everything crystal clear. Daniel will inherit everything." The nurse arrived, and I gathered my documents with shaking hands. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Dad said with finality. "It was over the day you were born a girl." I walked out knowing I had just been disowned in every way that mattered. But what Dad and Daniel didn't know was that I had allies they'd never considered. The next morning, I received an unexpected email from Linda Vasquez, Dad's longtime executive assistant. "We need to talk." "Not at the office. Corner Bakery on State Street, 2 p.m. today." Linda had been with the company for 15 years, always professional but never particularly warm to me. I couldn't imagine what she wanted. She was already waiting when I arrived, looking nervous. "Thank you for coming, Sarah. I've been waiting for this day for years." "What day?" "The day you finally discovered the truth about your mother's trust." My breath caught. "You knew." "I've known everything from the beginning. Your mother made me promise to keep copies of all the trust documents, just in case." Over the next hour, Linda revealed the full extent of Mom's foresight. She had suspected Dad might try to circumvent her wishes, so she had created safeguards. There was a secondary trust, one even Dad didn't know about, established through Mom's family bank in Boston. If the primary trust was ever compromised, Linda explained, this one would activate. "And Sarah, it's worth more than Mitchell and Associates itself." She handed me a business card. "This is Thomas Wade, your mother's attorney. He's been waiting 20 years for you to contact him." Thomas Wade's office was in a restored brownstone in the Loop. Wade himself was in his 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I've been waiting a very long time to meet you, Sarah," he said. "You look remarkably like your mother." For the next 3 hours, Wade laid out the full extent of Mom's planning. The secondary trust contained not just money, but shares in several companies Mom's family had invested in over the decades. Most importantly, it included a provision that would give me controlling interest in Mitchell and Associates if certain conditions were met. "Your mother suspected your father might engage in financial impropriety," Wade explained. "She included clauses that would trigger if any trust funds were misappropriated or if the company engaged in fraudulent activities." I thought of Daniel's embezzlement. "And if those conditions are met?" Wade smiled. "Then you inherit everything, including full control of the company." Over the next 2 months, we built our case meticulously. I hired a forensic accounting team to document Daniel's theft. We gathered evidence of Dad's misappropriation of my trust funds. We prepared for a legal battle that would expose years of betrayal. Dad died before we could file our lawsuit. The news came via text from Daniel. "Dad passed this morning. Heart failure." Despite everything, the news hit me hard. He was my father, and now there would never be a chance for reconciliation or acknowledgement of what he'd done. Daniel wasted no time. The day after the funeral, I received a letter from the company's attorneys. All assets had been transferred to Daniel before Dad's death. I was explicitly excluded from any inheritance and banned from company property. What Daniel didn't know was that his actions had triggered the exact conditions Mom's secondary trust was designed to address. 2 weeks later, Daniel arranged what he called a formal reading of the will at the company's law firm. It was pure theater. Legal will readings are mostly a TV fiction, but it was Daniel's victory lap. I arrived with Thomas Wade, carrying a briefcase full of documents that would change everything. The conference room was packed, Daniel looking smugly confident, the company lawyers, the new CFO Daniel had appointed, and various other executives. The reading went exactly as expected. Every asset Dad owned had been left to Daniel, with specific language excluding me entirely. When it was over, Daniel looked at me with pure triumph. "I think that's quite clear, don't you, Sarah?" Thomas Wade cleared his throat. "Actually, if I may introduce some additional documentation." He distributed folders to everyone at the table. "What you have before you is the Catherine Mitchell Family Trust, established 22 years ago, along with documentation showing systematic misappropriation of trust assets." Daniel flipped through the pages, his face growing pale. "This is nonsense. Dad had every right to manage family assets." "Not these assets," Wade replied calmly. "These were Catherine Mitchell's separate property, held in trust specifically for Sarah." He pulled out another folder. "Additionally, we have evidence of systematic embezzlement from Mitchell and Associates, which triggers additional provisions in the trust." The company's lead attorney was scanning the documents with growing alarm. "Where did these come from? Why weren't they disclosed during probate?" "They weren't part of Robert Mitchell's estate," Wade explained. "They concern assets that were never his to begin with. Furthermore, the embezzlement and misappropriation have triggered certain provisions that give Sarah controlling interest in Mitchell and Associates." The room fell silent. Daniel stared at the documents, his expression moving from disbelief to rage. "This is impossible," he whispered. "The trust has been on file for over 20 years, Wade replied. "The forensic accounting report detailing the embezzlement has been prepared by 3 independent firms." Daniel's lawyer stood abruptly. "We need to take a recess and review these materials." "Actually," I said, speaking for the first time, "there's no need for a recess. As of this morning, the board has voted to suspend you pending investigation, Daniel. Your accounts are frozen and your access to company systems has been revoked." Daniel's face went from pale to red. "You can't do this. This is my company." "No," I said quietly. "It never was." 6 months later, my life had transformed completely. As the new CEO of Mitchell and Associates, I spent my days restructuring a company that had been nearly destroyed by years of mismanagement. It was challenging work, but my background in finance proved invaluable. Daniel faced multiple fraud charges. His assets were frozen, his reputation destroyed. He was eventually sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution for the stolen funds. One of my first acts as CEO was establishing the Catherine Mitchell Foundation, providing scholarships for young women pursuing careers in business and finance. It felt like the perfect way to honor Mom's memory. My relationship with Michael had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. We were planning our wedding for the following spring. On the anniversary of discovering the truth about Mom's trust, I visited her grave for the first time since taking over the company. I brought white roses, her favorites, and sat beside the elegant headstone. "I want you to know I'm building something different," I told her. "A company where everyone is valued, where talent matters more than gender or family connections. I think you'd be proud." As I stood to leave, I placed my hand on the cool marble. "Thank you for protecting me, Mom. Thank you for believing I'd find my way." The path ahead wasn't perfectly clear, but for the first time in my life, I was making choices from a position of strength rather than desperation. The desperate need for approval that had driven me for so long had been replaced by something quieter and more sustainable, the deep knowledge of my own worth. In the end, Mom's greatest gift wasn't the money or the company or even the justice she had so carefully orchestrated from beyond the grave. Her greatest gift was making sure I knew I had been loved completely and unconditionally. And that, I realized, was enough.